Welcome to Leadership Unlearned and Reframed. In this discussion, we are examining leadership for our particular context. When we speak about leadership, we are not only speaking about a role in an organization. We are inviting you to take up your leadership mantle wherever you are. It may be in your places of worship. It can be in your community, in your households, as even as simple as your football team. Wherever you are, you can display your leadership. So we are here to debunk what the concepts of leadership are for you. So if you've been told, or if you grew up knowing that people who look like you, who do what you do, who speak like you, who sound like you, may not be leaders, we are offering you a reframe of that context. We want you to unlearn that. And if we're taking away, we're going to give you something in exchange. So we are offering a reframe of leadership so that you can walk away from this program thinking differently, probably willing to experiment with something differently, and just to look at yourself as a leader. And if you do that, well, then we've achieved our objectives. So with me today is Alana Jossel, who is a team and leadership coach, and she works and lives in South Africa. Welcome to the program, Alana.
Thanks, Maxine. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. It's my pleasure. And so, Alana, in your own words, can you share with us what you do?
Okay, so I am a leadership coach, working a lot with people in the world of work, supporting them in developing their leadership competency, but also, helping them transition through the leadership pipeline. So, leader of self to leader of other to leader of managers, and looking at what may be required of them at each of those points of transition. I also work a lot with teams, and with teams, I really partner with them, and we work with the dynamics that will help unlock the team to be the most effective that it can possibly be. So it's a lot of collective work, working together, thinking together, and developing those skills.
That's really interesting. And I love the way that you spoke about that leadership transition. And it really reminded me of that emotional intelligence model, the self, connecting with self, working with self, and working with others. And so from your observations and experience of leaders, what are some of the challenges that come up in terms of this transition?
I think in terms of the transition, what often comes up is starting to value different things about themselves as they transition from one part of the pipeline to another. So if I'm just a specialist and leading and managing myself, I need to value very different things when I transition to managing or leading others, because in that transition, it's not so much about what I'm doing, but it's how I'm getting things done through others. So I also have to start to value different things about myself and my role in the transition. So that's one of the things that I've noticed. That's what people often struggle with, is just letting go of. And you spoke about that, in the intro, letting go of what it is that they valued about themselves previously, and embracing what may be valued about them now in their role, and also connecting to it in terms of what the organization also wants and values of them in this new position.
And that's interesting. And as you were speaking, I get the sense of a sort of push and pull. Like, this is what I valued in terms of myself that got me here. And now that I'm here, to go further or to be more effective, I have to let go and embrace something new. So how do you help the leaders sort of embrace that change and transition?
It's a good question. So I think that a lot of it starts with awareness, and awareness of what it is, where they currently are at. And it reminds me, because I know, Maxine, we met when we did our master's in organizational development and change from a Gestalt perspective, but it reminds me of that famous saying, the paradoxical theory of change, that change actually happens by being with the experience. And I'm not stating it exactly as it's stated, but if you've got a better way of putting it, but there's something about, that it's by being more aware of where one currently is, that in itself helps create the change. So by being more aware of what's currently happening for people, also what may be required of them, and where those gaps may be, helps them also see things a little differently and gain a different perspective.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ways of working with that.
Yeah, and there's, as you spoke about, the paradoxical nature of the change. I'm just thinking about the word edge came up for me, so I'm seeing the leader basically being on the edge. And how do you help them to sort of gracefully take a jump or a leap off that edge and land in a place where they could effectively serve their teams?
Yes. So I think that, there's something there about really being very aware of what may be stopping people, stopping an individual from crossing that edge, what may be getting in the way of them. Perhaps it's delegating, if you think about that first transition, or what may be getting in the way of them embracing change, or whatever it may be. So it really is working with what gets in the way of, and also what, and what may be some of those edge figures, and how much of them are real. Because a lot of them aren't actually real. They're things we have in our heads around, I can't do that, or I can't bring my voice in to that meeting because they're going to think whatever of me. And it's really challenging some of the assumptions that sometimes we hold around some of those edge figures. And through that, hopefully debunking them, and suspending them, and helping people to cross those edges. And once they've crossed them, it's like, well, actually I can do it, and I've done it, and it's, and it works, and hopefully develop new habits and new practices.
Yeah, it just sounds so brave. It sounds, I'd imagine a certain amount of bravery for you to bring people to the edge, and a certain amount of bravery for the leader to take that leap of faith. And I'm thinking, to do that, they must trust you a lot.
So absolutely, I think that one does have to have a very trusting relationship with one's coach, because it is somebody who's really supporting you and walking the journey with you. And it's what I think what comes up for me there is the contracting up front, with the coach and the individual, or the leader, is really around what it is also they wanting to get out of the coaching. So it really is, all coaching is really led by the person who's being coached. And I know that, often the sponsor of the relationship is the organization. So there's input that, I get in that relationship between myself, the coachee, and the organization. But there's certain things that are confidential, and we contract to that along the way. But the purpose of the coaching may be, something that's shared and quite explicit, but everything is done with agreement. So there is something there, the trust is very important. And you're right, it does take courage. It takes courage to cross all sorts of edges. But it's like, the first time you jump into a swimming pool, you're crossing an edge, you are doing something that you've never done before. But there is something about having done it once that helps build the confidence for future crossings. But it's not to say, dive into the deepest ocean blindly. I think that one has to also, there's something about doing it mindfully and consciously that's important.
Yeah. It sounds like people can dive into the ocean with you as their coach.
I hope so. As long as there's a life jacket somewhere.
And I'm just thinking about, based on your experience and your observations, what have you seen in terms of, this question of trust? Because a lot of the theories around teams are really saying that trust is the foundations of teams. And what has your experience reflected in terms of the truth, or as you say, the myths of that statement?
So I think trust is very important for all teams. And I think, one of the big signals that there is a lack of trust is when people aren't able to have forthright conversations. That's for me a big signal when people aren't really able to bring in their voices or be able to say things that need to be said. But, I often ask myself, what is the thing that really allows for trust? And one of the key things that I've noticed is psychological safety. So if someone feels safe enough to say something, and what I mean by that is it's not about saying anything, but it's safe enough to bring your voice in around something that's meaningful, relevant to the work, to the team, to the organization, knowing that it won't be held against me. That is the big thing. I think Amy Edmondson speaks of psychological safety like that. It's where I won't feel that it's going to be held against me. I'm not exposing myself in some sort of a way that will have consequences. Then I'd be more likely to say what needs to be said, which is often very important when we're trying to challenge the status quo or bring in diverse points of view. And what really comes up for me is the role of the leader, a team leader in that, in really creating the conditions in the team for the members of the team to be able to bring their voices in appropriately, and also to balance that, bringing voices in, but then also converging on some sort of action at the end of the day. It's really a dance between divergence and convergence as a leader of a team.
Yeah. And then, as you were talking about it, I had two ideas. I think the main idea was, when you spoke about putting the voice in the room, very often the leader puts his or her voice in the room all of the time, which may not be leading to psychological safety. So helping a leader understand that part of the psychological safety really calls sometimes for the leader to be quiet, for the leader to demonstrate and mirror not knowing the answer, for the leader to create space and hold space for other people to come in. So that was one thought I was having. And two, what do you see in terms of the limitations of creating psychological safety in your work?
So when you say limitations, can you maybe just explain a little bit more what you mean by that?
Maybe I used it wrong. I could use another word, things that would prohibit psychological safety being felt by teams in the workplace.
So I think that what comes to mind is a team I was once working with, where the leader of the team turned around to somebody who brought something in and said, well, just put your big girl panties on. That would get in the way of psychological safety, because that's really shutting people down and not allowing them to bring their voice in, and not being aware of what the impact of saying those sort of things is on the members of the team. I think that's sometimes what does happen. Also, as you said, it is about creating the space for members of the team to bring their voices in, but also encouraging it. There may be something about asking, especially the quieter voices, what do they think about it? And obviously it's not everything, but these are conversations that are important to have when there's a dilemma or when something isn't that clear or it's complex. You may have quieter people in the room who hold some important information. A very helpful question to ask is, does anybody have a different point of view here? Or can someone build on what so-and-so has said? In that way, you can work with both, those that have different views, those who have the same views, gives you a better understanding of what's really sitting in the room.
Yeah, so the words and the language we use, that's very, very important in terms of your example, as well as inviting. One of the things that you said that really struck me was inviting that different opinion. You know, it's something that
Yes.
has not been said, something that you're holding, something that may be missing, or just different opinions. Because I think a lot of times we are afraid to sound different. Groupthink is real, and groupthink is usually celebrated in organization. So really important to create that space for a different thought. And so we're talking about quieter voices, and I know Hannah is on the call with us. So hi, Hannah.
Maybe she's on mute.
Hello.
Hi. Is there anything that you'd like to contribute to our discussions or any questions that you're holding for Alana based on anything that she shared thus far?
I guess I do have one question. That being, when you are in a very difficult conversation as a team in a team meeting, and you are thrown under the bus, to say put on your big girl panties, how do you present yourself in a way that you still look strong and resilient in responding to those type of comments? Yeah, if you could just answer that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Alana, you want to take a stab at it? Thanks, Hannah.
Yes, and yeah, thanks, Hannah. And I think, Maxine, I welcome your input here too.
Yes.
I suppose it is about the regulation, self-regulation in that moment of yourself when someone says that in a meeting, and you know, there is something about staying centered and grounded, and not, I suppose, showing your distress at what's been said. That would be part of it, because that's part of the resilience, and resilience is about you know, bringing yourself back into the moment as best as you possibly can, and finding a time to bring in that point that you can, you know, appropriately. And it may not be appropriate there and then, but it may be, you know, sometimes also certain things need to be taken offline. Sometimes not everything needs to be said in the team meeting or in the team session. It could be something that you go to the, you know, an individual with afterwards and say, you know, I just really wanted to bring this in because I really feel it's relevant to whatever it is. And I didn't feel like I had an opportunity in the meeting. And perhaps that person can help you bring it in another time. Especially, you know, depending on the power and rank in the room at that point in time. I don't know, Maxine, how would you respond?
I think it's such a relevant question for us. I mean, it's three women on the call, and we've been in corporate organizations, and I have been in similar situations where maybe I wasn't told, you know, exactly about my big girl panties, but where the feeling would be the same. That one, it was inappropriate. Two, that you are silencing my voice. And three, you're being derogatory in a very subtle way, right? So it's, you know, a sort of microaggression. But of course, to me, it just feels like aggression, right? Because it's not necessary. And so one of the things that I'm really aware of is, as Alana said, the self-regulation. That could really flare you. It could react, you can react in several ways. It can flare you up in terms of being really angry. It can shut you down in terms of, I will never say anything anymore. And three, it can also move you into a state of where, you know, you're hurt and you want to cry in that moment. So the self-regulation in terms of, you know, that is not about me. That is not who I am. These feelings that I have, I need to process it. So usually, like when I go to meetings, even now with clients, I would keep a notepad next to me and I would write, this client is triggering me, you know, as a way of getting it out. Because that emotion doesn't stay, it will show on your face, it will show in your words when you actually have to answer. So I keep a pad next to me and I just write all my feelings all the time. Like for instance, I was on a call just recently and this guy was really triggering me and I just kept my pen and saying, this guy is triggering me. I do not like him. How do I work with him? But he would not know that. So that's one trick that I use and I still use it today. And I agree with Alana that there would be a time and place that is safe for you to express the way that you felt about that. And that's what friends are for, right? Friends and mentors, they're the people who you can practice with in terms of, this is what happened, this is how I felt, I need to have this conversation, so that you can work on really having the rubric to have the conversation with the person. So when you're in front of them, you're not re-triggered. You can effectively convey the message. Listen, it was offensive, and this is what I would prefer going forward. And of course, the context of your organization will determine the sort of words that you use. Hannah, anything we said made sense or helped in any way?
I think it was very helpful. I'll definitely take the notebook trick going forward in future meetings. So I really appreciate it.
Good, we're happy to help. So back to you, Alana, and I just want to welcome Yogandran for joining us, and we will come to you in short order for you to share any opinions that you have on what we discussed. So Alana, moving on from this in terms of, you've been really helpful in sharing your opinions and experiences with us. Is there anything else along those lines that you really think that you want to share with us in terms of what you're seeing now as leadership challenges?
I think what I'm experiencing now, what I've noticed now, is there's a lot of change and a lot of anxiety with change that is happening, with a lot of clients. And just for a simple example, even COVID, work from home and now it's back to work, and people are being called back into the office now, and there's a lot of resistance to that. And it's, people who are needing to get people back into the office as leaders, not always buying into, well, we actually really need to have people back in the office. So how do I get people back in when I don't actually believe that they need to be back in? So it's that internal tension, I think, that I'm noticing quite a bit. And also with bigger things like restructures and changes that are about to happen, where they're not allowed to share what is happening, but at the same time want to protect their people. So it's always working with this paradox of feeling uncertain but having to portray a confidence, and it goes back then again to working with self in that. I don't know if you're noticing that kind of dynamic, Maxine.
Yeah, I think my personal experience as a leader has always been that paradox and managing that.
Yeah.
You go to a meeting, an executive meeting, and they're rolling out something and they're saying, don't tell anyone. And then your staff
Yes.
comes to you and you say, what do you say then, which will not erode trust, because you can't lie and still maintain your transparency. So it's almost as if to fulfill your organizational role, it puts you at that,
Exactly.
back to the edge of being trustworthy or losing trust with your team. And we know trust is so easily shifted with teams. So how do you manage that paradoxical nature that is embedded within leadership?
Yes. Yes, and I think, yeah, well, that's the question.
But I think that's why we have work, right? Because
Exactly.
because of that we actually need, organizations need help, that we are there to help them because we have to help them manage the paradox, and it's not,
Yes.
I think the understanding is that it's not a solution. There's no silver bullet, there's no plaster for this. So it really is about managing it on a daily basis with all of whom we are, or flaws and warts and all, I think that's the big, for me, that's the big difference between a consultant and the work that we're called on to do.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So it is, what you said about embracing the paradox really resonated with me, and it is about supporting people or leaders. That's what I find myself doing a lot of the time, is embracing that. And you don't have to be, for example, uncertain and and stay there. You can be uncertain about things and how they may be unfolding, but at the same time portray a sense of confidence, in where you are currently. And it's constantly finding your space in that range. So yeah, I think that's part of the work that we do and how we help leaders in doing that. And it is a challenge. It requires a lot of awareness, a lot of self-management, and it's awareness also of others and the impact on others.
Yeah. One of my favorite Gestalt theories that I really use a lot in the work, and which you just referred to, is that whole idea of the multiple realities,
Yes.
and knowing that on the spectrum of uncertainty and certainty, we can be both at the same time in sort of like different parallel levels. So it's like, we don't have split personalities. We have many personalities and we embrace all, it's not that this one pops up and this one pops up. It's that what is more effective for this situation. And I think that's where the challenge is, because as the world becomes more and more complex and the uncertainty rages, I mean, it's crazy, right? That we are required to be more and more sure and more certain, even though we ourselves are being battered constantly by those changes. And for me, that's where that's what gives me most pause. And that's where I have to prepare for everything. And the preparation is not in terms of the work, but a preparation is in terms of the centering and grounding of self, And so how do you ground yourself before you go out to help leaders in this uncertain world?
So there's definitely, breathing, the breathing practices, just centering myself and being very mindful of bringing myself back to myself, even if it's just a few minutes before each session, not running from one session to the other. I think that's also, quite important. And I'm going to actually use a little about our conversation today. I mean, Maxine, we have come in here completely unscripted, and it's a little bit, it's in a way, coming in, feeling grounded, feeling centered, knowing what I stand for, in the work that I do, connecting to that, and bringing that forth in the session and working with you emergently in it. And I think that's what happens a lot of the time in meetings or in coaching sessions. You can't go into a coaching session prepared. I'm not going in with an agenda. It's about the flow, and where the conversation takes us. So yeah, and I think that in itself is a reflection of how we work with uncertainty. There's so much that just isn't known, and it is really only about being present. And I love that saying by Sally Denham Vaughan, which she describes presence as being energetically available and fluidly responsive. And for me, that really captures presence in a coaching engagement or when working with teams. I really have to work with myself all the time in terms of how I'm energetically available to the others. So I'm not on a phone. I'm not, and I think, just speaking to you, Hannah, also there's something there about, how you show up in some of these meetings. It's about being fully present to what's actually happening, energetically, and then fluidly responsive. It's how do we respond to what's being said? And it's like moving in and out, if I can put it that way, like a dance.
Yeah. And what I love about it is that in that moment, you embodied the energetic presence. You came closer, you sat up. I don't know if you're aware of what you did, but I could actually see the embodiment of that presence when you spoke about it. And I guess the flip question would be, what makes us lose that presence and that energetic self when we don't show up, or when we show up less than we want to be?
So I suppose in my personal experience, it could be, if it's when perhaps very distracted and not actually feeling that present to what's going on. I've got lots of other thoughts, lots of other things that are tugging away at me energetically. Maybe something's just happened before I've walked into the meeting, but then there's something about grounding myself and building that muscle of presence. And I think it is about practice. You know, if I think about my own growth and development over the years, it's something I've had to really work with. So I think what gets in the way of it is also having too much on the go. And I think that's where, you know, as a coach, I need to be mindful of how many clients I have on in one go. You know, am I going from back to back? Am I creating spaces in between just to ground myself and, you know, to even reflect on where we were last time with a particular client? And I really do build that into my schedule. So there is something about being quite deliberate around that. But it would be also interesting to explore that, you know, for clients in terms of how they're doing it in the workplace.
Yeah. So a few things come up for me, you know. One, the multitasking, you know, people are proud that they can multitask. And are they really present when they're multitasking? So what is the level of attention you're giving to people, to details, the things that you're multitasking on? So that was one thought I had. And then the second thought that I had was how much opposite the coaching is to a facilitated session. So some, you know, a client calls me and they says they want a team retreat and they want an agenda. So of course, you gotta give the client what a client wants. You give them an agenda, and then when it starts, that agenda could really be tossed away because we work with what emerges. So even though the agenda may be relevant, it's not going to reflect what happens in the room. And sometimes the client gets a little antsy about that, you know, and really holding the client and saying, be present with me, trust the process. Don't trust me, trust the process and work through that. So I want to know, how do you manage those client anxieties when they have an agenda or when they think that this is what I should get, and what emerges from the conversation or the work is something completely different?
Yeah, it's quite a complex matter, that, but so I think in my experience, it really is staying close to the you know, the main client throughout that that retreat. So if it's the leader of the team, I think it is important to contract with them upfront around what it is that they really want out of that process. And as you say, you know, so that the agenda might be set aside, but this is what it's going to possibly look like, and to have more of a process than an agenda. I think that for me is what I try and do. But there is something about staying close and connected to the leader throughout that retreat and checking in with them regularly. You know, how's it going? Is this meeting them where they're at? Do they want more of something or less of something else? And also, you know, so I don't like going into any of those team processes completely cold. I would always do, you know, one-on-one interviews with each member of the team before a session like that. So I have a sense of what's really working for the team, what's not working for the team, and you know, and then have a meeting with the leader before that and share those high-level themes and say, these are my ideas, this is what I think the journey should look like, and get their buy-in, but also knowing that it may change depending on what actually happens in the room. Yeah, but there is something about building the trust, as you said earlier on, you know, the trust that they have in you as the team coach or facilitator, and also drawing the distinction between facilitation and team coaching, because there is a difference. You know, facilitation is really, you're facilitating a conversation, and it's sort of like, if you think of a hub and a spoke, you are sort of the hub in the middle, and you know, facilitating the conversation with each spoke. Whereas in a team coaching context, you're really trying to encourage the team to engage with each other. So it's not, it's removing yourself from the center. You're not the facilitator, but it's about obviously coming in appropriately to help them do that as best as they can.
Yeah, I love the subtle distinction between the two, because while both may be moving towards an objective, a stated objective, the methodology will be different for the role of facilitator and coach. And so it sounds like
Yes.
you're switching hats and knowing exactly when to be able to say, in this role, I'm facilitating, in this role, I am coaching. And it is quite, I guess it could be nuanced if you are a beginner and not realizing the edge of both, right? And that could be another paradox, right? Am I coach? Am I facilitator? And how do I treat with a client? So what is your indication that now you need to switch? Like, how do you know that I can switch now? Other than, and I know contracting is a big part of it, but I'm wondering if there's anything else other than the contracting that really tells you in the moment, hey, Alana, you need to switch.
So I think for me, the switch is really, so the facilitation piece may be a little in, painting the context, giving a little bit more, maybe a little bit of input on EQ or on maybe stages of team development. But then the switch would really be when the team is then needing to have a conversation about something, and really then taking a step back and allowing them to have the conversation. And trying rather to focus on noticing some of the patterns, of how they actually are engaging with each other, and making them more aware of that, rather than in the actual, working with any of the content of what's being said.
Yeah, I could share that experience because, and I think a lot of times when teams ask me to facilitate something, I usually end up in that coaching arena because my opinion isn't important and I am vested in not the outcome, but in the team having that discussion. So yeah, I totally agree with you. And so from your experience, again, when you look at that dynamic, what is it that prevents teams from having that conversation without you?
Yeah, I think so. Just in my experience, I think that they don't normally go through a process of establishing the container. And possibly if a team, and which is part of building the psychological safety, and also task becomes so heavy and so important that it often takes away from the process side of things. So I think a team coach is helpful in helping a team learn how to have these conversations and establishing that container and their rules of engagement in terms of how they're going to go about having certain types of conversations. But one does want them to be able to do it without you. So it is about, letting them do the work and coming in maybe from time to time, maybe observing certain sessions, and coming forward also with some suggestions around how they could possibly run meetings a little differently, or how is it that they're actually building on one another. If I'm noticing in a team everybody's just throwing out ideas and no one's actually building on any of the suggestions, there is something about also teaching them some of the skills of dialogue. So there would be an input piece, a facilitation type piece, but the actual coaching happens in the noticing of those patterns. So it's always a dance between the two.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that the coach is quieter than the facilitator.
Yes, definitely. Which can feel a bit uncomfortable. You sit there and you think, well, they're paying me a lot of money to be here, but are they getting their money's worth? That's the anxiety of the coach. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, that's as you mentioned, the money piece, right? It's such there's so many pulls and tugs in terms of who's the client, because you mentioned it before in terms of the leader and the team, the coachee and the organization in terms of that context. And so other than their contracts, right? So how do you manage that? Because that is also a big piece of the work, right? Who do I serve? When do I serve whom? How do I make sure that all parties are served in this arrangement?
I think that's a great question, Maxine. And I think, from my experience, when I'm doing team coaching, the team is the client.
Mhm.
It's not about any individual, and one has to, it's a bit like going for marriage therapy, where the therapist is there to take care of the marriage and not an individual in it. So it is a shift. It's a big shift from doing one-on-one coaching to doing team coaching in holding the team and what they're there in service of. And I suppose that speaks to also creating a space for individuals to be able to say what they need from the team to be the best version of themselves, for which they need psychological safety, which is what we spoke about a bit earlier on, but also for the team to say what they need of individuals in service of the goal, because, and that may be led a little from the leader, but there is something about also being able to sort of put that stake in the ground, and for the leader to be able to say that in an open way.
Yeah, that reminds me of that activity we used to do, right? I want, we need, right? So that play between what does the individual require from the team, what does the team need versus the individual. And really that levels of systems. So there's the individual, there's the team, and then there's the wider organization in which the team fits. So that's very interesting, because it's like a lot of work. It's just like a lot of work, a lot of thoughts in the moment, seamlessly happening. So let me just welcome David and invite Hannah or David. Is there anything that you want to share with us based on what you've heard thus far? Or any questions that you're holding, or any ways in which you want to join the discussion today?
I guess I just have one more thought, or food for thought, of something that I've experienced, and I think it is the perfect platform to have two amazing coaches who could probably and hopefully give me some guidance. I want to know how you make yourself, when you're moving up the corporate ladder, in a small environment, how do you make yourself known, present, and push forward to show your interest, to show your ability without coming on too strong, especially when there are different levels of experience, and you have partners or managers who've been there for a very long time and have their niche little groups, and how do you push yourself into the room without being a bulldozer, basically, doing it in a delicate and gentle manner, but making sure that people do know that you are there, and you do want to be involved.
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Hannah. Alana, I'll give you first stab and I'll join in.
So I think it's often how you frame things. And if I hear you, what I'm hearing is how do you bring yourself in to a room where there's a lot of experience. So I really love that dialogue model. I don't know if you're familiar with the Maxine, the 4 moves, but there's something about joining, which is the supporting. So you can demonstrate your presence by joining with supporting some of the voices that, what they're saying, where it really resonates with you. And you don't have to be an expert. And this is where it takes a little bit of pressure off of you, because you can join with a question. So you can say, yeah, that really, what you're saying really resonates with me, or it really, there's something that really struck a chord there in what you're saying, and I'm wondering how. That would be the question that would then follow. So you're building on what they have said. If you're going to move or oppose, that's where you really need to frame it in a way in which it will land, and that's really going to depend on the context. But yeah, and there may be things that you could also bring to their attention through just what you're noticing. So I'm noticing that in the room that there are quite a lot of different opinions here about how we actually approach this, but there's more of a pull towards one than the other. You could bring your voice in that way as well. Don't know, Maxine, if
I
you'd
love
like to take a stab at.
Yeah, I love those 2 points, Alana, because the joining is something that we don't really promote. And the joining is quite different from the groupthink or agreeing with people. The joining really answers the question, how do I show that I'm part of this group? So, and as consultants, we always have to join the group before we take them on a journey. So I think the joining is a solid piece of advice. The other thing that Alana said that I really want to just celebrate is that how do you ask questions, and also to what is missing in the team. So if you sit at your team and you realize that people just say ideas and at the end of it, nothing is done, maybe you can generate for your team a to-do list and say, based on our meetings, I just generated this because of everybody's thoughts, and to capture everybody's thoughts, not being the secretary for the group. It's quite different, right? What you're doing is being what is missing. So you don't take notes, you're not the note taker. Or if you're taking notes and calling yourself a scribe. So be very deliberate about the role you want to play in this team, and base that role on what you see as missing in the team system. So just as Alana said, there are ideas floating and nobody has really stopped and says, tell me more about that. That could be your voice, and that's a way of questioning as well as joining the ideas. So look at your team and really sit and observe. And I do remember when we started management theory long, long ago, they said that in Japanese culture, for the first year, a junior manager says nothing, that his or her role will be observation, to learn the patterns of the team, to see what is missing in the team, and to join the team in a particular way. So I think really, if you want to make your presence felt, what is missing in the team? What can I provide? What great questions can I ask? And great questions, what and how questions, that's how you frame them, so that you'll be known for some roles. So carve out a niche for yourself. You can also begin to network with different people in the organization to see what they need and what is missing in their system, and how can you provide it based on your experience and your own point of view without losing yourself. Any of that help you, Hannah?
I think that's very helpful, and something that not just myself but many others can take going forward. It's really important just to find your niche and your value add. I think that's what I got out of it. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Oh, great. Well, good, Alana. We're 2 for 2 with Hannah. That's good. That's good questions, Hannah. And David, do you want to say anything, join the discussion, ask a question, or just say hi?
He seems to be on mute.
I'm more of an observer here and a listener, and I think the learning that I've just got from Hannah is fantastic. I think it's always awkward when you move into an organization and you have to find your space, and especially when you're young I'm not sure, young maybe, and you're still moving into an environment. It's quite complicated. And I think the advice that you gave was fantastic. Really thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, David, for validating Alana and my experience. And thank you so much. It makes it kind of easier, right? Right, Alana, that, we get a nice, warm, fuzzy feeling from the audience. So we have about 10 more minutes in our discussion. And so I'd like to move to sort of put a bow on this in a particular way. So can you look at what we've been discussing today in terms of this journey that we've been taking? It's kind of like, it's been many threads, and hopefully we've woven some sort of carpet or not. So in terms of where we started and where we are at now, what are you thinking about right now in terms of this conversation?
I think Maxine, what comes up for me is really leading from the inside out. I mean, that I think would sum it up. Whether you are the leader of the team or whether you are a new team member in a team which there's a lot of experience, a new joiner, it is, and as you said early on, you know, it's about accessing that part of yourself that allows you to display leadership in any context. And it is really about leading from that part. It's the awareness piece, you know, knowing where you are. It's the self-regulation piece. And it's about the individuals in relation to others. I think that would really sum it up. I mean, we're not in anything in isolation. It's, you know, we are in relationship to one another, and something someone does is going to impact me, and what I do is going to impact others. So it really is the awareness of both, and taking ownership for my piece in it. I think that's what's coming up for me. I don't know, what's coming up for you?
What's coming up for me is that sort of shape shifting, you know, that so even from from focusing on you, Alana, that shape shifting in terms of I'm facilitating, I'm coaching, I'm contracting, I am serving leader, I am serving team. And it's still who you are, and it's still how you're present. And there's just a slight turn, you know, into a slight shift in how you're present for each of those pieces or each of those client or stakeholders who you are serving at any point in time. And, you know, it was beautiful to watch in this conversation as you spoke about those shifts. And that is what I'm holding with me as we move to close. It was really about how you serve the individuals, how you serve the teams, how you focus on the leader, how you focus on what the leader wants, and how in the moment you will evolve. And that notion of being observer to serve, you know, moving from doing to being, and that your presence is what you work with to make the magic happen for teams. So that's really what I'm holding, that magical shape-shifting Alana. That's what I'm gonna call you. That's what I'm really holding on to, that image of you. That's what I'm seeing.
Thanks, Maxine. Wow, I need to just embody that now.
Yeah, well, you have already, right? So that's the paradox, right? What I see versus what you see. So I would invite you to see what I see. It's been a really beautiful chatting with you, and I just feel very inspired to be quiet.
Maxine, would you mind if I ask a question?
Sure.
Alana, the question is, how do you approach staff that strongly oppose your management style? So in an organization, it's quite tricky when people don't follow your style. How would you recommend that you deal with that?
So, I mean, it's quite a big question there, because there's something there about, I would invite the person to be a bit curious around what it is the people are resisting. You know, why is it that they are, you know, not following that style, and to be a little bit more curious about that, because there's something that's happening in that dynamic. That would be my sense of it. And perhaps you're not having the person's not having the impact that they would like to have, perhaps because of their style. And that may be the thing that, you know, that they need to have more awareness of.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was also thinking about what we've been playing with in this conversation, the letting go and the holding on of. So
Yeah.
what about their style and their rigid around, and what do they need to release to be more effective? Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, you're most welcome, David, and thanks for the question. So as we move to close, Hannah, David, any more questions or thoughts for us before we wrap up?
All good from my side. Thank you. Thank you for a really insightful podcast.
Thank you, Hannah. So we move to wrap up, and I want to thank Alana for being here with us today and just taking the time to share, all of your experiences and your observations about teams and leaderships and navigating this really complex and uncertain world that we're living with. So Alana, last thoughts from you.
It's a challenging world, but it's also what makes it exciting. And yeah, it's been so lovely, just sharing thoughts and ideas with you, Maxine. And thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to have this conversation. Very emergent, very divergent. So thanks a lot, Alana. We will see you again
Okay.
shortly. Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.